Hello, everybody, and welcome to another bookish chat on the Good Book Life with me, Donna Scott. And I am joined today to discuss We Eat Controversy for Breakfast, the pros and cons of award shortlist. And I have some guests who are no stranger to award shortlists and have some opinions.
Hi folks, I'm Alan Stroud. I'm a university researcher and science fiction writer. Used to be chair of the British Science Fiction Association after Donna, and have been responsible for the British Science Fiction Association Awards for a couple of years, but I've now handed it over.
You can call me Beth, but I write as E.M. Faulds. I write science fiction and fantasy mostly, a lot of short stories, and I have a second collection out now with Newcon Press, and it's called These Broken Little Worlds.
I'm Laura Jane Round, and I'm primarily a horror writer, though I do go into non-fiction and poetry. I was a freelance competition judge for quite a few years, so I've been in and around the award circuit.
I'm Rick. I'm a short fiction author from Yorkshire, England. I've won the BSFA Award for audio fiction, and I've lost plenty of them as well, including one to Beth, which she was gracious enough not to mention, my arch nemesis. I'm also the co-editor. Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, there's a plural of nemesis, isn't there? We have nemesis. We all have nemesis. Nemesi. Okay, so my first question, and I think most of you have already explained this, but what is your own relationship with literary awards? You can take that question however you like. You may have answered it literally. You may have wished to answer it in a different way. So, Rick, as a multi-award nominee, what is your relationship?
Well, I have the unwanted record, I believe, of most BSFA losses in 1 year, which I set this year. And I will add the previous holder, Fiona Moore, hugged me for taking it and thanked afterwards, which was not appreciated. But yeah, obviously, I've also managed to win one in audio fiction. I've been a judge for 4 years for the British Fantasy Awards, which has been quite good fun. And yeah, that's me.
Great. Beth?
Yeah, so obviously, like, we all saw awards from a distance at first, and so obviously the bookers and things like that were always on the radar. And then when I sort of started meeting the SFF community, then I heard more about the Hugos. For myself, I first dabbled in the idea of awards when I was a baby writer, and so I was first long and shortlisted on the James White Award, which is sadly now defunct, but it was based in Ireland, but it was for new writers in Britain and Ireland. And so that was my first sort of taste of it. And I guess I've had a couple of other dabbles with things like the BSFAs and the BFAs. So yeah. Yeah, so that was good.
I always think the James White Awards were very exciting. I used to like seeing the stories that came out every year, and I discovered quite a lot of new writers that way. So I think they were good awards. Laura, how about yourself?
I guess I am also still in that stage of seeing awards from a distance. I have been longlisted before. I have done my judging. I guess I'm coming from the angle of what it's like to be in your 20s and then sort of aging out of a lot of the new writing awards that you can go for. I think there's a lot of ageism in the community. Obviously, I'm still in my 20s, but I can't imagine what it'd be like. Say you start in your 50s, your 60s. Because I've judged some beautiful pieces of work from people from all walks of life, and then you need to be young and hot and exciting, and now I'm old and decrepit by their standards. It's a different landscape, I think, and it's changing all the time.
Oh, you've hit the nail on the head. I used to say in my 20s, there's always the Granta and the Betty Trask, but those things are not often awarded. So that's the thing, is you have to hit. I think the oldest recipient of the Granta was Sarah Waters, I think, because she was just technically aging out of that when she got it. I could be wrong. We'll check this later. I might put it somewhere. I don't know. I might edit this. Alan, you and I have worked together quite a lot on awards, and we know the swan's legs are involved in the background of that kind of thing, haven't we? And we've worked with other people who've been managing awards, so in the same sphere. So yes, how about yourself?
I think my sort of relationship, and you put the question as your relationship with awards. My relationship is love-hate, frankly. I detest the word best in any category relating to awards. I've said this many times because I have a bit of a problem with when something is from the perspective of a reader and the perspective of a critic. I have a bit of a problem when something is labelled as best. As soon as it's labelled as best, I sit and go, come on then, show me, impress me. And I don't want to feel that as a reader. I want to enjoy what I'm reading. So I think that there's a little bit of an issue around the way in which because generally speaking, awards in themselves are subjective processes. They're either judge or they're democrat. They're popular vote essentially through that process. So I think some of those things are kind of in the sort of hate category, and then when you know the mechanics of the voting in the background, I think that can also make you a bit jaded and cynical in relation to awards, just because it is not necessarily that anything wins that shouldn't win. That's not what I'm saying. But what you do find there are things that you see move that no one would want to really talk about in detail, and no one would, it would benefit nobody to talk about in detail. But you can see things that move sometimes when there are lobbies or when there are, sort of blatant attempts to try and move something onto a slate, sometimes within the rules, sometimes outside of the rules. All of those things, when they happen, they kind of give you that little bit of, to have to try and make it work. I adore long lists. Absolutely adore long lists. I love when someone somewhere finds something that people aren't reading, that's a self-published piece or a translated short story or something from that really hasn't received the recognition it needs and highlights it to people. I love that, and anything that does that I think is great. I love the humbleness that we generally see when people receive an award, when they get that kind of recognition. Quite often writers are quite a shy bunch, and so when you put them front and center and they have to go, I won, and they have to kind of deal with that, I rather like that. I mean, it's slightly cruel, but it's for their own good. Sometimes they need the recognition in terms of what happens to them.
It's like at the end of a ceremony. Oh, sorry, but what's that you saying?
I was saying it's much easier if you outsource it. There's a reason I picked writing, where I get to write inside and not have to talk to anyone.
Yes. At the end of an award ceremony, we very often have to sort of like corral the writers back to get their photo taken because they all want to run away. And it's like, oh, thank you, I'm going to the bar now. No, picture. Do I have to? And then get them to stand still in a position to have their photo taken. They're all going, ooh, covering my face. yeah, writers. So long lists. You mentioned long lists, but what do you think shortlists do for writers, readers, and the wider ecosystem of books? I'm going to ask you, Beth.
Shortlists compared to long lists is it's just a case of you've got to kind of whittle it down a bit, otherwise you're judging from probably a very, very wide field. So like there can be such a variety of different approaches to, and it does depend on which award it is and what they're trying to do, but you have to make the work a little bit easier for picking a winner at the end, because if you had the long list, it would be too hard. I mean, what it does for the writers, I think, is it just gives them that little bit of a spotlight. But I'll come back to that question when we go on to the Hillport Inter.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Rick, what do you think?
I really like the difference between the long list and the short list, to be fair, because it actually does seem to make a big difference in who's getting voted for as well. Because if you go on the short list, it has to be a lot of people like, oh, I really like Alan's work, I really like Beth's work, I'm going to go vote for them. But when they're going through the long list, they remember, I read that 9-10 months ago and I've forgotten about it, and this is wonderful, I should vote for it. Or, also a case of, I know Beth's writing, I've not read that, I better go read it before I do my shortlist vote. So I do think it makes a lovely difference to the two voting patterns. And it's quite nice to have some awards with it and some awards without, so you get a bit of a mix.
Yes. Laura?
I just wanted to touch more on that point, and that writers kind of want to run away from the spotlight. In my experience, because you have to be your own promotion, you have to put yourself forward for awards, especially in terms of poetry, not having your own publisher. You end up having to do a lot of that PR yourself. So I kind of found the opposite. Everybody is desperate to be seen because it feels like an overcrowded market almost. You're not afforded that experience of being shy and retiring. Like, you don't have the privilege of doing that anymore, which is a bit of a shame, because it'd be nice to just focus on the writing. But the amount of what you need to do to put yourself out there, because people are just not putting the money into marketing, even if you do have a publisher, is just it's a bit disheartening, because I know some of the people who are doing it do not want to be doing all of that, but it's the only way they can stay in that sphere. And also, in terms of what you said about Alan Stroud said about, like, there are wins that shouldn't have won. I do.
It's not what I said. No, it's not what I said.
Sorry.
Didn't say
What
that.
did you say? Sorry.
I said sometimes you see things in the background of stuff where there are lobbies, and there are lobbies for specific works and stuff. I never said anything shouldn't have won.
No, that's what I mean. You said that there's no such thing as something that shouldn't have won. And I would say, in terms of, like, our new problems with AI and assistance, I wonder whether, that's something to talk about in terms of shortlisting, because we've been having problems with that locally with local awards and such.
Oh, that does sound awful. Because we've been recently talking about AI in submissions as well, and I'm having problems with some of my submissions definitely being AI, or people writing to me with maybe nefarious intentions, trying to tell me that other writers are writing in AI, and you don't know who they are or what they want from you for that, and they give you no proof. So it's like, great. We have a lot going on in the publishing world with AI, and then to consider the awards may possibly be going to something that is AI assisted. That is another thing, and I think we're starting to see the creep of that in the general publishing world as well sometimes. So Alan, what were your thoughts on the wider ecosystem and shortlists?
So there are some examples where shortlists have absolutely made the work suddenly be discovered. And I think that's that's a great thing. There are another moment where essentially you're bringing out the kind of the final selection, as it were, and sometimes we see sort of second tier critical writers will pick those up and do their own review of that selection and so on. And generally speaking, when that happens, that even if it's critical, even if it's negative, it's all highlighting the discussion and the process and the stuff that's that's being put forward. So it's quite good. I didn't mention I'm also lead judge on the Aldis Award. When we put the first Aldis Award list out last year, one of the things that was quite interesting is because the criteria of the Aldis Award are not about story in and of itself. It's more about an imaginative world. It's which is the most imaginative world from the list of books that we and games, because they're judged together, that we look at. That can throw up a very different selection. So again, you're giving this opportunity for an array of works to be seen, and for people to kind of, people who've got, generally speaking, people who've got a palate for it, right? That kind of reading palate of going, oh, I'm interested in different stuff. Actually, I think awards categories sometimes are very good for that kind of reader, and shortlists are good for that.
Yeah, I also personally, I really like a nice tight shortlist of 5 things. That gives me something I can actually target as a reader. So if I want to sort of like get a good flavour of work for that year, then I can read a shortlist and feel like I've caught up with it. Because this is like the zeitgeist, as it were. So for me, having a nice tight like shortlist of 5 is good. And I think I'm looking at, say, the Clark Award shortlist this year. It's a huge variety of different books. One of the books I know quite well, and the others I don't know so well. So I'm looking forward to getting into those and seeing all the differences, especially as some people have been a little bit harsh about some of those books, but they do sound interesting to me. So I would like to see what they're about. They're different.
I always disagree with the Clark shortlist. I generally don't think the Clark shortlist is, and and you and I both know that as chair of the BSFA, you recommend judges for the Clark list. So a lot of the judges are friends of mine, they're friends of yours. The interesting thing is that every time the list comes out, I sit and look at it and go, nope, that's no, I would never have put that forward, never put that forward, I never put that. But then I'm not the one doing it, they are. So you got to respect that. They've read 100 odd books each. They've made a judgment, and that's the way in which it goes.
The thing I do like as well, Alan, though, is you're saying that you wouldn't have put that forward, not what some people have said, which, oh, that's trash, how could anyone ever vote for it, which is quite a nice difference to see, to be honest.
Well, we are talking on a podcast that's going public. It could be that, when you mute the microphone, I'll say something different. But the point being is, you kind of have to, when you're involved in these processes, you have to have that level of, not detachment, I think detachment's the wrong word, but that level of understanding that everybody's writing a book. It's hard to write a book, right? It's tough. It's not easy. It's not, there's no blueprint, much as some people would like you to think that there is. And and it's not made easier by AI, much as some people would like you to think that it is. So there's a level of respect that has to come from that. You have to respect everybody that's in that process, and you have to kind of, I can sit here and grumble at home, but at the same time, you have to have that level of respect for every writer that's engaged with that, because they have chosen to write a book, and a book is hard. It takes 3 months of your life at least, and that's only from my experience, because I'm sitting here in the middle of a draft.
So jealous.
So it is the way it is.
3 months, if only. So what's a book you've discovered only because it has been on a shortlist? Are there any books like that you can think of? For me, Alan Hollinghurst. I wouldn't have picked up Alan Hollinghurst had it not been on a shortlist for the Bookers. I wouldn't have got to know and love the work of A.S. Byatt. So those are a couple that I can think of. Are there any that you guys can think of? I mean, they're not science fiction, but they're books.
I mean, Jan Martel's, is it Jan Martel, Life of Pi?
Yes.
I wouldn't have heard of that. It is quite a fantastic book when you look at it. I know people go, oh, it's literary, but I mean, it's fantasy. And obviously there's things on the Hugo's list that you don't get in the UK, like Martha Wells' Murderbot was really not available in the UK for many, many years, and we just kept hearing about it. And I was like, by the time we got hold of it, it was great because we built up this sort of suspense.
Yes. Laura, how about you?
I first, despite her being so local, I first heard about Liz Berry through the Booker Prize, because I believe she won the Booker Prize for Best Chapbook. And I also remember seeing, this is very away from fantasy, I'm sorry, Young Mungo on a shortlist as well. And I'd never heard of that writer before. And to read that was quite a tough read, but I really, really enjoyed it, and it's informed my writing going forward.
Well, one of the big ones for me, same as Beth, is Murderbot, because I had no idea what it was, and then I found out, well, this thing's just dropped and it's won 3-4 Hugo, so it must be good. And to be fair, that is one of the best series I think I've read in years. It's wonderful. And the other one for me is because I always make a point of reading all the Hugo novellas, because I really generally love novellas, is Butcher of the Forest by Primi Mohammed, which genuinely I think is my absolute favourite novella, and I never would have read it if it wasn't on the Hugo shortlist.
Okay, so you mentioned some controversies. Do you think online discourse can shape public perception of a title, shortlist, or an awarding body, and to the good or bad?
I mean, I'll dive in on that one. Generally speaking, no, in that I think that there's a little bit of shouting in the wind that tends to go on, and I've seen a fair amount of punching down as well, which is never good. I think there is a need, particularly for people who are involved in awards processes, and Rick's kind of touched on this by accusing me of politeness. There is a need of people. Yeah, there is a people who are involved in awards processes to always consider that those processes are difficult, and that there's a lot of work that goes in, and that those processes may work in different ways to the ones in which they work in. So yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate in that you can find circumstances where if somebody is, I don't know, an authority in one particular award, and then they choose to comment on another award, that's not good practice.
No.
I don't think that's good practice at all. I think it's fine to, to be general, and in that regard, I have no issue with things being general, but I do think it's problematic if they're specific, and I also think it's problematic when people don't respect that volunteers are doing an awful lot of work. We've seen quite a lot of that as well, where people just focus on, maybe something was wrong, maybe there was a typo somewhere, maybe there was a set of things that got released that should have been set back in a different way, and there has to be a correction, and that nobody wants to get it wrong. Nobody wants to get it wrong in the slightest. We're all trying to find a way to celebrate the community that we're all belong to, and actually the awards are about that. They're about that kind of annual celebration. They're about bringing people together. They're an excuse, in some respects. We can give out some glass or some cleverly designed resin, whichever preference you have, and that gives us an opportunity to put people in a room, and that's nice. Let's do more of that, because actually that bit is the bit where everybody gets to kind of see what everybody else is up to, and how they're doing and everything else. So I think those are the problems, and I would say that the commentary can fuel attention. So the online commentary can fuel attention, and I think that's fine. I don't have an issue with criticism in that regard. There's some very good blogs that go through the shortlists and then and evaluate them and say not for me, or I really like this one. Absolutely no issue with any of that. Mm-hmm. It becomes more problematic when when it's kind of railing against the system in some way, which I think actually there's other forums for that.
I do think there is definitely a case, though, for sometimes things being called out when they needed to be. Like, for example, the Hugos during the year of the Chinese Worldcoin. That probably only resulted in the way it did thanks to online discourse. And it is literally sometimes you see like a problematic book, or author that should not have been included in a group that does need to be called out, but not, it has to be for a good reason.
Yeah,
not just for
agree.
someone's particular peccadillos or taste. It's like the difference between Neil Gaiman being added to a shortlist at this point versus someone just didn't like this author's personality. Those are two very different spectrums, and it's like you can kind of see where sometimes you feel like an awarding body has got a little bit of it's sort of a bubble of privilege or something where they've like not realized what's happened, and then they get in such awful amounts of online hate for it, and it just seems like but if you kept your finger on the pulse there, you would have known that already.
Yeah. Sorry.
I was going to say, I felt particularly bad for Adrian Tchaikovsky, who felt he had no option but to hand back his Hugo that year because it hadn't been a fair field. And I think one of the good things that I got from that year was that there were a bunch of writers who had been excluded, and I deliberately sought their work out and read it. So
some positives can come from the attention that it actually generates for the people who've been, I don't want to say victimised, but who've had an issue.
But one I'd like to give a genuine shout out as well, because it's bad enough for Adrian Tchaikovsky had to give up his, but Samantha Mills, who was a much smaller author, barely Matt was meant to be her big huge moment, she gave hers back as well because she was like, well, I don't know if I actually want it or not. And that devastating for her.
I'd say the court of public opinion is larger now. It used to be that, I know everybody says the internet is very much a loud majority, but I have seen things get quite prestigious awards, but as soon as it hits the wrong note in terms of more like the Wild West, say, I'm not really up, but Book Talk, Instagram, all these places, once they've gone down in public opinion, we have seen sales drop. As soon as somebody says it's trash, it becomes kind of like an echo chamber with that. Everybody's like, let's get on that and denigrate that work. I think that people are they are trying to rally against the system in that way, because for a lot of people, these prestigious awards weren't seen as very accessible. And now everybody's like, well, I'll make my own. People self-publish these days. They feel a little bit outside of the system. And I understand that anger, but it kind of becomes a pile-on, which doesn't respect somebody who's taken the time to write a book. And like you said, the subjectivity, just because somebody says it's good, you're allowed your own opinion. You don't have to take that award from somebody. If you don't have any stock in the award, because some of the awards I've seen and the shortlists, I don't think that much of, to be honest. But it's nevertheless, they are there, and it's not for me to tear that down. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so, and I think I'd give my sort of full endorsement and agreement with Beth's point in relation to the Hugos in that year. But then again, that wasn't about one individual making a commentary or anything else. That it wasn't about one pick. It was systematic. It was highlighting, actions and circumstances that had happened, and gradually we then found out, all the detail behind that, which was pretty awful, in all respects. Thankfully, we're past it. Hopefully, the lessons have been learned. And you'd probably also want to, or I would want to pay a little bit of tribute to the people that held their hand up and actually allowed that information to be out there, in part, so that it could then be, be dealt with in a way that hopefully it would never happen again. I'd also suggest that those writers who made that selfless decision, that's massive, right?
It's
You
huge.
know, because the endorsement of something like that can be life-changing, you know, and you mentioned that, Rick. It can be the biggest moment in someone's career, and actually having that moment altered in that way is, you know, is devastating. And you can only hope that people would then react in a way that is supportive and is positive and is constructive towards that person continuing doing what they love. You know, they may never get there again, and they, you know, I expect most of them would acknowledge that. You know, if the book that year was the right book, the next year it's not the right book, the next year it's not the right book. You don't want a sympathy award. You know, you want your work to be judged, you know, as the most amazing thing, you know, in that time by those people, etc., etc. So that takes a lot of bravery, and I think that actually that speaks more to those individuals as human beings. It says, you know, and I guess in the kind of flip, it speaks to the problems, you know, in terms of the flaws of human beings, as well, in terms of, you know, all those circumstances.
Yeah, I would also like to shout out to the Worldcon of Glasgow, who were the next year after the Chinese issue. And they were absolutely 100% transparent and showed everything that they were doing. So there was no hiding. You know, they had to disallow some votes because they had noticed people trying to game the system. And that could have easily turned into, oh, they're blocking people from voting again. It's the same as last year, but they absolutely laid everything out and laid everything, all the cards on the table.
Yeah.
The only reason
I mean, it was actually a
without
huge
controversy.
Yeah, it was absolutely a huge challenge for them as well. And they had to have people who were technically proficient to be able to spot that as well, which is a big ask when you're just a volunteer organisation. Because at the end of the day, that's what they are. They're volunteers, volunteering to preside over one of the most prestigious awards out there in literary terms. Literary terms. I cannot speak. Right, I'm going to ask one more question before we go on to our wrap up. Okay, so I would like to reflect on this. How can we make sure awards stay as ethical as possible? That's a big question. Okay, I'm going to leave Alan. I'll come back to you. I'm going to come to Rick first this time.
Personally, like one thing I was touching on earlier, which is we have like a bunch of different award systems out there in obviously the SSF world, because obviously we have BSFA, which is a members vote. You have Nebula, which is a very small professional writers vote. You got World Fantasy, which is a mix of voting and things, and then you have like the Locus, which is an entirely public vote. And I do think having that mix is actually one of the best things going, because it allows that no one thing can be truly gamed, because there's always going to be a little bit of, oh, you know, we're going to try and work out how these awards work and play the game and modify things. But because you've got so many different things, I do think that massively helps and people can see what's happening. And then, of course, when you do get the few pieces which transverse more than one award category, it kind of shows you about something really special.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Laura, what do you think?
I think that it's about again making it more equitable, which we have been doing, that transparency, but also not making it an easier landscape for writers in general, and putting more money into that so people don't feel like they have to constantly be trying to game the awards. I know people who have calendars that are just like award season, it's all they can think about. They're always writing to a brief. They don't have that space to breathe and maybe write something that would be actually amazing, because it's the only way to get seen and it's the only way to make a living is through these awards. And I think that cheapens it a little bit and doesn't make it as special as it could be to win them, because so much is on the line. It's not about your integrity or what you want to do, the collaborative process. It's about, I need this, or I'm sinking under the weight of everything else. I think that just speaks to the landscape at the minute in terms of how much the arts are valued in this country. I think they're a good thing, but I think that if we can make them not everything, it would mean there were less people trying to game that kind of system.
Yeah, we have this a lot in comedy as well. We have lots of pressures in the comedy community with things like judging panels who were also the reviewers at the same time, which I think is unethical. Because you'll just give it, if you're going to review the show that you're judging, maybe you should take another staff person along to do that rather than do it yourself. Yeah. Alan.
So there's probably a couple of things that currently keep specific awards robust. So I generally would divide awards into, I'm going to leave aside pure popular vote awards for a moment. So if it's a juried award, then, as you're saying, the choice of jury, if there is any circumstance where there is a connection between the juror and the publication, there needs to be recusal. That has to happen. And you know, within a community that's quite small, we generally accept that people will self-police that. When that doesn't happen, if it comes out later, it's awful. So, you know, I think people have to recognise that is the circumstance that can happen if you don't recuse yourself in that regard. Within a voting award, if the voting base is specialist, so it's either an association or people who've elected to attend an event, so on and so forth. Having rounds of voting, particularly with preference voting, is a very good way of ensuring that lobbies don't get all the way to the end, particularly if you have a preference voting system, because, and I'll just be blunt here, if there is a lobby for a specific text and that text is number one, number one, number one, it's not going to be number two on everybody else's lists when the next person gets dropped out. So if you have a preference order and you do that, then the lobby group, their tendency is to just push the text that they want to push. What they then don't do is push any of the other texts, and what the other people don't do is they don't push the lobby text, because it's not part of their generally their reading. They basically have read a load of other stuff, so this lobby has kind of almost come in from the side, as it were. So we've seen that within the stats, we see those fall away because of the fact that the lobby group pushes. There's a slightly self-defeating thing, because sometimes what they do is they'll all put this thing as number one, and then they won't put a 2, 3, 4, and 5 or whatever, because they think that's going to in some way affect it. It doesn't make any difference what they do. It's actually what other people do that makes a difference and kind of polices the thing out. So I think that's interesting. So I think those two design processes in terms of putting together your award system, they're quite important. And if you maintain those, as in you keep an ethical jury, or you have a phased voting system of some kind that essentially supports you, then you can preserve the nature of the award.
Yeah. Beth?
For ethical, I guess I'm coming at it from the point of view of the writer side, and I guess also the readers, because that's a symbiotic relationship. The thing that for me would make it most ethical would be the selection of the titles going in and the writers who are representing, and it has to be as wide as possible, and that includes, for me, ethically, I think self-published writers are missed a lot, and they should not be, because it's such a crapshoot getting published in the first place when there are 4 companies that control everything in the world. and they can't take that many people, and then they take people and they don't have marketing budgets unless you're a celebrity, you know, these kind of things. Everything is playing against you. So why should self-publish be looked down on? Except that obviously there has been a flooding of Amazon with, let's say, lower quality books, or books that people, you know, reviewers, academic reviewers think are trash, all this sort of stuff. But it's also like, why not allow them to stand or fall on their own merits? You know, and yeah, there is obviously going to be a numbers issue with that. But if you have, as you say, Rip made the good point of, if there's a lot of different ones out there, then that's good. Then you can perhaps accommodate some of that. But yeah, I think for ethical, just there should be like just an outright AI. No AI.
Yeah.
Not, you know, not in your little but I was just using it for this. I was just no, just do it yourself. That's, for me, would make things a little bit at least human ethical, as opposed to you know, whether or not the judging process is ethical. But yeah, the juries and selection committees also, yes, being of different diverse backgrounds, and not just privileged people, because often sometimes these things come to the people who are already at the top of a very rickety pile of people's lives underneath them. So, you know, I think you should be selecting from different strata for that. Not to say that people shouldn't be qualified to do the job, but obviously people can be qualified without having gone to Oxford or something like that, which is not really much of a problem that we see in, say, for example, the British Fantasy Awards and the BSFA Awards. Generally, people who are in charge of those committees tend to be fairly egalitarian. But I think in other, you know, the big prizes, it's not getting out to everyone, is it?
Yeah.
So anyway, make it accessible, make it actually fair, make it actually, you know, make it actually have equality built in.
Can I just come back on that point about AI? And I agree with the sentiment of the point on AI. There was a BSFA issue a couple of years ago in relation to this on the artwork award. Now, there are certain types of what we're now calling AI, but actually is procedural generation or large language model systems, whereby all the information has been, and this was in the art award, has been compiled by the artist on their own work, and they have utilized processes that are only utilizing their own work and their own content. And in that circumstance, there is no content scraping, there is nothing that is infringing on anybody else's IP, there is nothing that is being done that is outside of that, you know, their own artistic merit and their own artistic content. In those circumstances, we've actually seen some of those processes being used in the 70s and in the, you know, very early on in computer programming. Some of those things are, you know, currently being lumped in with what we're calling AI. And I'm not saying you are, Beth, in the slightest, but we have had people come back and have a very kind of unnuanced thought in relation to the way in which that works. And I take a bit of an issue there, only because where I draw the distinction is if anything has been scraped from anybody else, if it is used anything that any other artist has used, if it's used anything any other writer has used, you know. So all the major, you know, image generators and text generators, they've all had circumstances where they've been called up for scraping the work of, you know, of different writers and different artists, and I'm absolutely against those things. But where someone's invented their own tool and it's completely within their own content, then, you know, as far as I'm concerned, that becomes something different.
Well, I feel for you in terms of trying to judge that from, because who's made it? Is it the computer that's made it at the end of the day, or is it the artist? I mean, there is a difference between using an algorithmic tool to, say, help you smooth a line that you have drawn, to putting your own work into a big blender and seeing what it spits out. I feel like those are two very different things, and they could be, if there is someone who wants to use that as an example of this is a valid artwork, then it could have its own prices.
It feels like
the person who's actually, drawn everything themselves, coloured everything by hand, I feel like they're doing a different job. So it's therefore apples and oranges to me.
It does feel a bit like the difference between using a spell checker and using word prediction, to be fair. But even if you're using your own work, there's a huge difference between the two items.
That's my point, yeah.
I mean, I've seen generated filters that have absolutely transformed, pieces of art, and you would not know that that's essentially what has been done. But that's actually not an AI tool or any kind of, that's a tool that's been around since the early 1990s.
Yeah, to me, that's not what I would call AI.
Right. And this is the point. And similarly, as a musician, I have a whole bunch of composing tools that I can utilize that are sampling original orchestras and are using them in a variety of different ways. That's not AI. No,
but also you're not putting yourself up for Composer of the Year, is that? I'm sure. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I'm afraid. I don't think I'm ever putting myself up as Composer of the Year. But thank you for the thought. At least it was mentioned in this conversation.
Okay, well, I think we've come to the end of our discussion, and that's a good place to leave it. So, would you like to talk about something you think you've got going on, something you'd like to promote, and then we will call it an end to the podcast? Alan, what have you got to promote?
Oh gosh, what am I doing at the moment? So, I had this book out this year, which was Anti-State, which is over here, which actually involves an AI trying to take over Mars. So obviously very current to the conversation that we're having, but it's the 16th book in the Fractal series, which I'm currently working on the 17th one, which is available from Flame Tree Press. And later on this year, you'll see over that shoulder, I've got the Historical Dictionary of Fantasy Literature, which came out in 2023. I have the Historical Dictionary of Science Fiction Literature coming out later this year from Bloomsbury. Unfortunately with that book, you almost need a second mortgage to buy it. So I would say just, to any university students, go out there and borrow it from your library. Don't go and buy an edition of it.
Okay, Beth?
I mentioned my second collection, which I have a copy of it here. Hopefully it's not reversed in the picture on when it comes on the video. Yeah. So these Broken Little Worlds. It's out with Unicorn Press, and it's just a bunch of short stories. I also have a novella out with Wizard Tower Press, which is part of the Wiz Duos series. So that's called Bring Me Home, and it's in Wiz Duos Volume 2.
Thanks. Laura?
Right now I've got a lot of irons in the fire, nothing I can talk about much, but if you'd like to see my previous catalogue of work, you can go to laurajaneround.co.uk and you can find my previous poetry pamphlets. I should have a poetry collection coming out soon, and I'm going to be in a few folk publications as well, some English folk revival writing, non-fiction. So if you follow me on Instagram at Laura Jane Round Writer, you should be able to see some updates for that as well.
Great, thanks. And Rick?
Oh, I've got the Fission Six anthology, which is literally just come out. It is my first experience, and because I'm not as smart as Beth, it's going to go the wrong way around. It's my first experience editing. I'm really proud of it, and it's got 20 fantastic short stories. It's free for BSFA members, or you can buy it on Amazon.
Great, thank you. I'll put links in the section below to show where you can join the BSFA if you wish. So there we go. As always with me, I mentioned my latest anthology out with the Slab Press is Obsidian, and I will put links for that too. And as ever, like and subscribe. And I just need to now say thank you to all my guests for joining us to this discussion. So thank you to Alan Stroud, EM, Beth Faulds, Laura Jane Round, and Rick Danforth. Okay, thank you very much, and bye everyone.
Cheers.